to the other presentation from Gabriel Callan, and the title is Acoustic Measures of Birds Communities in a Thinned and Burned Coastal Plain Pine Forest. So, Gabriel, are you here?
I am here.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'll share my screen. And I'd like to thank the organizers while I'm doing that. I've really enjoyed all of the presentations. Actually, I want to make sure I share sound. Okay, how is that?
Perfect.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Gabriel Cahalan. I work for the Nature Conservancy. And today I'm going to present something that I think is a little different. I'm actually a preserve manager for the Nature Conservancy. So I do a lot of on the ground work at preserves. And so I've really been struck by the conversation so far about how bioacoustics can be applied, and I've been happy to see discussions and presentations with less technical aspect and more application. So I'll be talking about prescribed fire and some acoustic work that I've done at a preserve in Maryland. I'll start by orienting you and talking a little bit about fire, and then I'll get into the actual study that I did and the sampling scheme and some preliminary results and conclusions. So the site is pictured here on the top photo on the right. It's called Nassawango Preserve. And I'm including a photo from Sidling Hill just to show some variation in oak hickory forests in the mountains of Maryland. So the map here, this is the eastern United States. And I'd like to acknowledge the Pocomoke tribe and other Eastern Shore tribes, including the Nassau-Wawash band of the Nanticoke, who have stewarded this land for millennia, and in particular, Dr. Jeff Kerwin, who continues to help me understand the application of fire in this landscape. All right, so I'm going to start with some geophony. I think that's what you'd call it. It's the sound of fire. This is recorded by Jennifer Jarrett of the National Park Service, and it's in their library. This is a recording of the Maple Fire. And then I'm going to transition to a video after that of a prescribed fire in Georgia, recorded by Rich Reed and the Nature Conservancy, just to kind of get everyone in the mood here for this talk, and to show some visual and audio. Right. Can everyone hear that? Again, this is a prescribed fire. So in the video, time was sped up, obviously. The fire was more real time, and then the photographer left his camera out in the forest for a few months after the fire. But what I'd like to point out is the majority of these pine trees survived that type of fire. And you could see how quickly the ground cover rejuvenates after the fire in this area with a lot of grasses and herbaceous vegetation. So that area in Georgia is very similar to where the study site that I'll be talking about is in Maryland. We're a bit further north in the eastern United States. It's a temperate forest on the border of subtropical. It receives high rainfall and in the absence of fire stays in a closed spectrum forest. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. And I won't have time to get into all the reasons we burn or all of the different things that fire does in a forest. But just one here, fire reduces tick encounters and tick-borne disease occurrence. And so in this area, there's a tick-borne disease called Lyme disease. It's quite serious, along with a number of other tick-borne diseases. And so this paper was just published a few years ago, 2019, examining long-term frequent prescribed fires by Gleim et al. Okay, well, biophony. This is what the forest in our area sounds like. Start that over. So that drink your tea, that's Eastern Towhee, and earlier we were hearing a whippoorwill. Okay, so for this study, started out as a pilot study just to see if a nature preserve manager could use acoustic recorders to monitor our management interventions. We burn for a number of reasons. The tick encounters is one, but also for a number of rare herbaceous plant species and the number of rare species of grass as well. And one hypothesis is that fire increases the available habitat for insects, which then provides more food to insectivorous birds. So I was looking at, I thought that open forest birds or this type of bird will thrive in a thinned and burned forest. So the preserve, a little bit more on the preserve. We have management plans on about 2,400 hectares. A lot of this was former timber company property with Pinus taeda, loblolly pine planted, but also naturally occurring pine species such as shortleaf pine and also pond pine, along with a number of different hardwood species. Okay, so I divided the preserve, and this was mostly because of the way our management occurred. We started trying to restore some of the timber plantation lands in one particular location, a tract that was about 650 hectares. And that left a number of other similar forests that we had plans to restore but had not yet. And So I'm just showing here that the forests that we've been restoring over the last 10 years, we returned frequent fire to that forest, which placed it on this open forest spectrum. And then I was comparing that to this other forest where we have a loss of surface fire due to normal fire suppression in this landscape, where the early successional forest enters mid-successional, and what we call, a stem exclusion time period where stems are closed in, and then in the absence of any other disturbance, we end up with late successional closed forest. But notice that it stays essentially closed, a closed canopy throughout this entire process. And then either a timber cut or a wildfire, severe wildfire, would then set this closed forest back to early successional. So what does this look like? Here I have pictured audio moss, and what we did was we placed 12 audio moss in the area where we had been managing for open forest conditions. So you can see, abundant sunlight on the forest floor, grasses and herbaceous species, along with shrubs, resprouting shrubs, here pictured. We put out 12 audio moths here with homemade cases. They were set to record between the hours of 4 a.m. and 11 a.m. I was particularly at this time targeting, the time of day where birds would be most be singing. They sampled for one minute every 5 minutes. So 1 minute sample every 5 minutes. And these have been set out every year from 2018 to this past year in the spring. And I also targeted this so that the time of year that we set these out for 10 days during the breeding season. And then the same thing in the closed forest. So we had 12 audio moth recorders there as well, set out during the same time periods. All right, so let's see. We took this data and calculated acoustic indices, including acoustic complexity, the bioacoustic index, normalized different sound index, and a few others, but I'll just show some of these. So we have, this is from the first year, June 12th, 2018, looking at the acoustic complexity index on the top left, the NDSI on the bottom left, and the bioacoustic index on the right. And then another way to look at the data is this is the mean bioacoustic index from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. And so this peak we're seeing here is the dawn chorus, and the thinned and burned site is in red, and the non-management site is in blue. And then the other thing we just recently have started to look at is remotely sensed forest characteristics. So these are derived characteristics from Sentinel satellite, things like trees per area, trees per hectare, tree height, basal area, and then in our database we also have the estimated age of the forest. So here I have the bioacoustic index compared to trees per hectare, and the thin and burn site is in red, and the other site, the comparison site, is in blue. Notice this outlier here. I'll show the same, or I'll point out the same point in the next one. So this is the range of trees per hectare, and this is that same point. So we can see it has a higher range, so an opening versus an area with dense trees, and so that contrast probably providing an edge there for that sampling point. All right, so why do we care? In this part of the United States, we have a number of what have been called in the past early successional birds, but are probably open forest birds historically. They're in decline, so northern bobwhite, eastern towhee, field sparrow, indigo bunting, prairie warbler, and yellow-breasted chat. So while we would think that they should be doing fine because our percent of successional forests in eastern US has either been going up or staying about steady over time, their numbers continue to go down. And part of that is probably just a reduction in overall habitat, not successional forests, but a reduction in overall habitat plus a reduction in open forest. So as I said before, a lot of our forest stays on that closed spectrum without fire. Right, so we've just started to look at specific species like prairie warbler and eastern towhees in our data. And it appears as though in both sites, they're the same species are using the forest. There's just more birds, more abundance in the open forests. So in summary, I think acoustic recording is a useful tool for preserve managers. We found a higher bioacoustic index in the open forest maintained by frequent fire at this study site. For the future, we'd like to explore longer recordings, 24-hour recordings, and using potentially volunteers to manage the data and the battery swap outs that would be required. And then connections between fire-shaped habitat and insects, and then also examining the effect of whether or not there's a difference if we standardize the recording distance through playback, whether or not that would change the acoustic indices just because there's more trees in the way in the closed forest. We want to see how much that has an effect on our results. All right, and with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. So I see a question from Florencia San Germano. I don't know if you can read, is for you. So the question is, did you filter First, a very interesting work, of course. And did you filter out recording with the rain and or other geophonies? If so, how?
So we did just manually listen to samples and filter that out, but I'd like to explore automated using the rain filter to filter that out. So there was certainly probably some could be some bias introduced there, although the sites are fairly close together. So if, for instance, an airplane went over, it would go over both sites.
Okay. And okay, you have a question. What kind of bioacoustic index did you use?
So the bioacoustic index was the Bowman et al. And then the acoustic complexity, I used sound ecology in R to calculate that, and the NDSI as well.
Okay. So other question? Okay. So thank you very much, Gabriel. And we can go on with the other